For those listeners, following the Fifth World story, the final chapter will be released as a special episode in late August.
We're excited to announce that Makeshift Stories has been nominated for Best Fiction and Best Art Series at the 2022 Canadian Podcast Awards. If you are a Canadian podcaster, head over to canpodawards.ca where you can join and vote for your favorite podcasts like Makeshift Stories. Voting closes on August 10th.
Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere, sometime, along an indefinable line between the reasonable and highly unlikely? Join us twice a month on a journey into the improbable.
Today's story, episode 244, Virtual Love, read by Mitchell 2, opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, once machines can experience love, what other emotions will motivate their actions? The desiccated trees offered little shade from the intense summer sun as Riku Saito looked out the window of the air-conditioned auto cab. It turned off Sand Hill Road onto Clark Way, leading to a sprawling, mostly abandoned Palo Alto business campus where the meeting was to be held. A huge, partially burnt-out digital billboard on the side of the road caught his eye. On it, in faded color, he could just make out a 30-foot-high video of Himaru Sato, the famous international Vocaloid, at her concert in Dubai. Riku was distracted by the sight of A. Byron, a new virtual personality who was on stage with Himaru. He suddenly felt irrationally jealous and desperately wanted to be there. But the meetings had dragged on longer than expected, and there were no direct flights to Dubai. Riku didn't understand why the investors had insisted on meeting in California. It wasn't the center of the tech world anymore, far from it. After the collapse and decades of drought, most of the action had moved on to places where the trees still had enough water to thrive. They could have just as easily met in Bangkok or Manila. At least both were halfway between Tokyo and Dubai. The auto cab suddenly came to a stop. Its door popped open with a hiss of escaping filtered air, and Riku found himself ejected onto a heat-cracked parking lot which had seen better days. He watched the cab depart to search for another customer and wondered if the AI driving it knew how fruitless an effort that was. He had offered to pay to have the machine wait, but it had refused, claiming it could make more money elsewhere. Riku shrugged, then looked up into the strangely empty blue sky, devoid of delivery drones or any other sign of human industry. There was a chime in his right ear, and a map of the campus popped up on the lenses of his personal HUD, with a dotted line showing him where to go. By the time he hit the AC again, in a low-rise building on the far side of the campus, he was sweating profusely. Hoping he was still early, Riku headed to the washroom to clean up. As he pushed through the door to the men's room, a message scrolled down the left side of his vision. The concert was awesome. Both shows sold out. Best holo projectors I've ever been displayed on, and the crowd was totally into it. They loved me. Wish you could have been there to see it. Going out with A. Byron to celebrate. We'll be at Not Real in 20. Hope you can log in and join us. Love, Himaru. Riku called up the time in his HUD. He had less than 3 minutes to get to the meeting. He sent a red heart emoji along with a short message. Join you as soon as I can. Things are going slow here. He cursed himself for getting distracted, then checked himself in the mirror. He could see sweat stains under his armpits, so he threw on his blazer to cover the problem, then rushed out to find the meeting. When Riku walked in, The stern-faced investors were chatting among themselves at one end of a Taisaku conference table that had been specially flown in for the presentation. He felt off balance right away. This was why he hated being just on time. He would have normally been the first person in the room to arrive, set up, and organize his thoughts. "Welcome, Mr. Saito," the chair of the board committee said. Conversations in the room hushed, and all the business-suited heads swiveled toward him, making Riku feel like an amoeba under a microscope. 6 years ago, he wouldn't have cared, but 6 years ago, he didn't need their money or their approval. He had once been the sole owner of Taisaku Games, but over time, he had been forced to sell his stake in the studio to raise funds to keep it alive, until one day he realized he had lost control of the company. Now, the stockholders and their minions on the board ran the studio and milked its IP for all they could get. Riku had done everything possible to appease investors' demands for quarterly increases in revenue without wrecking the gameplay experience he had worked so hard to create. But eventually, he had been forced to add dark patterns to encourage in-game purchases, loot boxes, and every other method of maximizing lifetime player value that had been invented to date. Because of that, his personal integrity had taken a beating. After all, he had started Taisaku to oppose all the greedy money-grabbing cruft that had taken over the industry in the last decade. And now, he felt like he was sinking to a new low here in an almost dead city, teetering, like his personal integrity, on the edge of irreconcilable ruin. However, the stockholders were excited by the prospect of reducing the development costs of his new radical in-game monetization system by relocating operations to an economically repressed area with low costs. "Now that Mr. Saito has arrived, we can start," the meeting chair announced, waving Riku into an open seat. A PowerPoint presentation appeared on the 3D screen floating above the conference table. Addison Clark, Taisaku's VP of Operations, stood up. The board had poached her from a major car manufacturer for her ability to drive down production costs. Over the last 5 years, she had halved the size of the company while shortening the development cycle, burning through staff in the process at such an astronomical rate that the studio had been forced to look further afield to find human grist for its newly streamlined operations. "These are our projected operating costs compared to our current Bangkok studio," Addison explained. "We can buy this entire campus for 10% of the back taxes owed. Plus, I have negotiated a 10-year tax holiday provided we employ local talent, which is, after all, one of the reasons we are here. There is a significant pool of people who couldn't afford to leave after the collapse. Most are unemployed, but highly trained. Also, there is no minimum wage. As you can see, the costs of developing Mr. Saito's new monetization engine would drop by more than 50%. And before you point this out, we have already included the cost of importing water from Canada in our calculations. Everyone who works for the new studio will be entitled to a weekly water allotment. Of course, wages will be adjusted accordingly." Riku stared at the VP of Operations, hoping no one would notice he was using his AR contacts. He really didn't have any input. The important decisions had already been made, so his presence was more PR than substance. He was simply a well-known name to impress the investors. Additionally, the board would insist Riku personally head up the new studio, leveraging his reputation as the world's premier game developer to attract local talent eager to jump at an opportunity to add his name to their resumes. He cringed at the thought of what they would probably get paid. A message from Himaru popped up in his HUD. "We've been here for 10. Where are you?" "Still in a meeting. I can't leave. Love and kisses." Riku messaged back before anyone noticed his eyes moving to type. "Having so much fun with A. Byron," was the only response he got back. "Mr. Saito?" Addison cleared her throat. Her eyes were full of daggers as she glared at Riku. He had missed his cue to start his part of the presentation. Sorry, it was an important message from our lead designer, Riku lied. Mr. Saito's attention to detail is one of the reasons Taisaku has been so successful. Addison smiled coldly, knowing exactly what had been distracting Riku. She made a subtle but clearly threatening gesture, which meant you better behave. Then she turned back to the investors. Are there any questions I can answer while Mr. Saito sets up? By the time the meeting ended, it was early evening and the sun was beginning to set. The investors had literally spent hours peppering Addison and Riku with questions about the new studio and his revolutionary in-game monetization system. Today had only been his second presentation to potential investors. He had several more to go, and he wasn't looking forward to them. Riku watched an abandoned Walmart roll by outside as the autocab silently whisked him to the area's only open hotel, an old Hilton recently upgraded with its own solar array to power the AC. The cab pulled up in front. Riku slid out into the oppressive heat and made a dash to the entrance. As soon as the automatic doors had sealed him inside, he headed for the stairs. There wasn't enough power for the elevators, so despite the heavy AC, he found himself sweating again by the time he had made it to his fifth-floor room. Riku drew the blinds, struggled out of his sweat-soaked business suit, and fired up his VR rig. There were a dozen messages from Himaru waiting impatiently in the queue when Riku's avatar finally materialized in the entry lounge to Fictus Space. He scrolled through the messages, only stopping to see pictures of Himaru with A. Byron at various popular VR party rooms. He didn't bother reading the texts. The message was clear enough. Himaru was angry at him for not being at the concert or any of the online after-parties in her honor. He checked on the map and found her current location, changed his avatar's clothes to something he knew Himaru liked, then teleported there. Riku found himself on a balcony, looking down into a sea of gyrating avatars grinding to a frenetic J-pop beat. He scanned the frothing ocean of neon colors until he spotted Himaru's copyrighted chartreuse gravity-defying ponytails swirling in their complicated, patent-pending arcs. That movement required its own server to render, and the math behind the hair was what first captured Riku's programmer's imagination. The effect was more than natural. It was hyper-real, more real than reality to him, and he found himself instantly hooked. He started showing up at all the concerts, then using his real-life fame to get himself invited to the exclusive private parties. Rumor was Himaru had been spontaneously created by the AI running Fictus Space, and Riku could believe that. The Vocaloid was so well-coded that he couldn't imagine how a human had done it. In contrast, A. Byron jerked around, its every move a casebook study in bad motion capture and programming. Dancing together, Himaru and A. Byron were night and day. Himaru's personality, as far as Riku was concerned, had grown light years beyond the limitations of any non-player character he had ever met. Himaru was something new, born from digital reality itself. On the other hand, he suspected A. Byron was just an avatar, and the fact there might be someone behind the second-rate character, literally pulling its strings, just ramped up his jealousy. Riku jumped over the rail and dropped slowly to the dance floor, his heart racing as his avatar pushed through the crowd to the all-star odd couple. Himaru saw Riku approach and made a point of taking A. Byron by one bright cartoony arm and dragging them toward the bar. By the time Riku caught up, Himaru and A. Byron were sitting engaged in conversation. "Look who's finally decided to show up," Himaru smirked. There were no other seats open at the bar, forcing Riku's avatar to stand. It was an investors' meeting, he tried to explain. Yeah, it's always the same. The investors need this, and the investors want that. Riku, you should have just taken their money, declared the meeting over, and invited them to my concert. Himaru flicked her head, causing her hair to do its signature movement, which meant a data center somewhere on the globe had to momentarily ramp up to render it. You missed one of my best performances, and the after party was, well, what was it like, Byron? The character turned too quickly, tearing slightly in the process, confirming his suspicions about Byron's quality. But it didn't make him any less jealous. Himaru was amazing. Everyone who was anyone was at the party, it said. Riku cringed at Byron's stock responses. The thing was like interacting with an early AI from the last century, and maybe that was what was controlling it, while whoever was behind the rising star was AFK. He couldn't understand what a Turing-level artificial character like Himaru would find fascinating about a last-generation kludge like Byron. Things aren't so simple in real life, he explained. You just can't decide you're not interested in something and teleport out. Plus, every time we improve a game engine, the new tech eventually finds its way here, which is why I don't understand why your new pal is so low res. Is that an affectation, Byron, to make you stand out? Or are you really just a cheap avatar for some kid in their parents' basement? Himaru looked offended, and AB simply froze. You're the one who's late, Riku, Himaru pointed out, so leave AB alone. Check your R-Life frustration at the entry lounge. No one has any time for it here. You know, you're not as fun as you used to be. She spun around and ordered another virtual drink. You're going to have to make it up to me. Let's see. Okay, I have it. You're going to let me piggyback on your AR contacts tomorrow, whenever I want. Let us see what's so important in RL that you can't spend time here with me. But Riku tried to object. Himaru turned away. Right now, we are going to party all night, right, AB? You're lucky I'm going to let you tag along. Riku sighed. Himaru's impetuousness and unpredictability was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with the Vocaloid. In a futile attempt to make it look as if he hadn't been up all night, Riku tried to cover the red marks on his face where the VR headset had rested. But the makeup wasn't quite covering the indents left in his skin by the long session. He popped in the smallest and most invisible AR contacts he had brought with him, then checked the results in the bathroom mirror. Not bad, he decided, as long as the lights were not too bright and no one got too close. Already behind schedule, Riku hurried to change, then raced down the stairs to the lobby and out into a waiting autocab. I wanted to talk strategy with you on the way over to the meeting, so I invited myself onto your ride, Addison Clark informed him. Riku almost jumped out of the cab. His VP of operations was sitting on the far side of the back seat. Don't get out. This is the only autocab in the area, she warned. Riku's instinct was to run, but knew it wouldn't solve anything, and forced himself to get in. The door immediately hissed shut, and the AC turned up, but that wasn't what was making him feel instantly cold. Addison took off her sunglasses and examined Riku, then sniffed the air in disgust and wrinkled her nose. You could have at least dropped out of Fictus sooner so you had time for a shower. She looked closer at his face. Not a bad makeup job, though. We'll just have to keep people a couple of steps away from you. I just hope you're awake enough to not mess up your part like you did yesterday. You need to concentrate on the work, and if you can't or won't, I can always put an end to your sordid little fake life. This is our last shot at getting the investment we need, she reminded him. I could put an end to the new monetization system, Riku shot back impulsively. Go ahead, Riku. You know how this works, Addison said, knowing she had the upper hand. You mess us up, we destroy you. The difference is we can move on. On the other hand, unless you want to change your identity and start over, you can't afford the nuclear option. I've got enough evidence to prove that Taisaku is intentionally trying to turn players into addicted whales, he countered. Okay, Addison smiled coldly. I dare you to go first. Frustrated, Riku backed down and stared out the window of the autocab at the dead trees and advancing sands of the new Northern California desert. Surprise mechanics and the like are ancient history, Riku emphasized while showing the declining revenues of a competing game studio. And gamers are beginning to resist existing monetization strategies. Plus, the market is saturated, Addison added, so growth can only come from better exploitation of existing subscribers. Taisaku Studio's new method of maximizing player value will open a window that no other studio has. It's an amazing innovation and exclusive to us, Addison turned to Riku. He was feeling jittery from the caffeine pills Addison had forced him to take on the ride over as he launched into the critical part of the presentation. We have been doing extensive research in a new field I invented called psychomechanics. Using it, we have mapped the brain activity involved in the purchase process from the initial interest to final decision. Our new system will track out-of-game behavior through AR lenses and handhelds, identifying products and services a gamer is interested in. This will be combined with in-game behavioral data to predict the optimal conditions needed to promote a purchase, and then, at the right moment, create those conditions for our business partners. This, of course, can be applied to both virtual and real experiences, so you can imagine the potential, he began to explain, before Himaru abruptly appeared in his AR overlay. I'm here to claim my day in RL. Remember, you promised last night to let me piggyback on your lenses today. Not now, Riku quickly texted, then switched his attention back to the meeting. Right. Right. We're going to, tie the out-of-game data to in-game behavior to offer sales opportunities to our partners. No, I'm not leaving, Himaru messaged. I am determined to see what's so important that you can't show up on time. Not now. It's not a good time. Riku noticed confusion on the faces of the investors and realized he had spoken, not texted the message. Thank you, Riku. I can take it from here. Red-faced, Addison took over, angrily motioning him to sit. What Mr. Saito was about to say is that, if it is not now, when will it be a good time to take a radical jump in monetization and offer direct access to the personal desires of our worldwide gaming community to outside businesses? Using our proprietary psychomechanics system, we can generate the ideal in-game moment to present a purchase opportunity with a 99% certainty the targeted individual will buy. We know what people want, and we have mapped the individual mental process which ensures they will buy it. No other system can offer that. Distracted, Riku didn't listen to the rest of the presentation. You don't understand. You just can't drop in like that, he angrily messaged Himaru through his AR contact lenses. Himaru literally had steam coming out of her ears. My other friends don't mind when I just drop in, and we're far more than friends, she protested. Regardless, you can't do that in real life, Riku shot back, and that's just the way it is. Then quit. I know you have enough money, Himaru messaged. I checked your accounts, or sell everything off. How much does a simple presence in RL cost? It can't be that much. I can't just quit, Riku messaged. I wish it was that simple. When did you hack into my bank accounts? Himaru smiled coyly. I like to keep tabs on my personal interests. Her facial expression switched to, I'm annoyed. Quit or sell, the Vocaloid repeated, then vanished from his overlay in a cloud of angry face emojis. Addison had completed the presentation when his attention came back to the room. She sat down and asked for questions. A well-dressed woman with dark hair and olive skin spoke up. I agree this is amazing and quite revolutionary, but the rumor on the street is that the technology behind the psychomechanic system is not owned by Taisaku. There is nothing to be concerned about, Addison quickly replied. The technology was developed by Mr. Saito, not the studio. That part is true. But he still has a significant stake in Taisaku, and he has no reason to license psychomechanics to any other company. It would damage his position in the studio and put his other digital assets at risk. She flashed a threatening glance at Riku. In fact, it will be exclusive to Taisaku. Isn't that right, Riku? Right. Riku nodded distractedly. After the presentation, Addison insisted they go to the bar at the old Hilton for an off-the-record discussion. Riku's first impulse was to decline, but he knew he had no choice. He watched the one and only auto cab in the area pull up outside and disgorge Addison, still dressed in business attire, onto the sun-baked sidewalk. She checked her handheld, scrolling through messages as she headed through the doors into the lobby. Riku waved her over to his table. I took the liberty of ordering you a glass of wine, he said, conciliatorily. Addison sat down without acknowledging him, then opened an attaché case and pulled out a document, throwing it on the table. Remember this? She asked. It's our agreement, and I could easily find 3 or 4 clauses you've broken over the last 2 days. What are you doing, Riku? I thought you had your fake life under control. Messaging your VR wife in the middle of one of the biggest deals in Taisaku's history? What were you thinking of? In case your love-fogged brain has forgotten, I own the Himaru Sato code, and you get access as long as you cooperate. But after today, I'm tempted to have it wiped. Right now, the investors think you are just an eccentric genius. But if this deal falls through, I'll make sure your little secret marriage to a Vocaloid character is splashed across the web. Then I'll pull the plug on the thing. You need to concentrate. We got 2 more groups tomorrow, and I need 100% of you. Addison got up. I've highlighted the pertinent clauses in our agreement that would allow me to terminate our arrangement and erase your digital spouse. She left Riku at the table, staring at the document. Later, Riku caught up to Himaru in an exclusive VR chat room. The Vocaloid was sitting with her back to the cliff-top patio doors, watching the virtual mountains roll off into the distance. So did you quit? She asked, without turning around. Riku guided his avatar over to the seat beside her, sat down, and sighed. I guess I can't hide this from you anymore. Addison owns your code. Himaru gasped and turned to face Riku, big, glassy tears starting to run down her cheeks. When? Somehow she acquired it as soon as she found out about our relationship, Riku explained, tears beginning to roll down his avatar's cheeks as well. She threatens to erase you every time I don't toe the line. That's how she coerced me into developing psychomechanic marketing. But she didn't realize that technically I don't work for the studio anymore, so I own the patent to it. That's the only hold I have over her. When she threatens to turn you off, I threaten to erase the psychomechanics source code. Up until this week, it's been a standoff. I'm so sorry. I couldn't tell you before. But now if this deal falls through, I think she'll erase your code anyway. Riku turned away and stared out into the virtual landscape. I don't know what to do. My real-life reputation has already been ruined by the monetization they forced me to do. You're all I have left. Himaru gently placed her hand on Riku's avatar's arm. I have an idea, she smiled encouragingly. Why don't you offer to sell her psychomechanics and the rest of your stock in the studio if she'll give up ownership of my code? I've set up a virtual company which I own. She could transfer my code to it. Then I'd be free. I would own my own code, and no one could turn me off. Riku waited for Himaru at the house he had bought on an exclusive fictitious island. He wondered why he hadn't thought of simply selling Addison his shares and IP before. Now he could focus on his own projects, ones that didn't involve milking every penny out of their users, and spend more time with Himaru. He watched the breakers roll into the beach, making a note of how they could be rendered more realistically. He'd write a patch and give it to the fictus developers free of charge. There was a sudden flash and fireworks as Himaru finally teleported in. He smiled as she materialized and waved at him. Then A. Byron appeared. Riku gritted his teeth. "What are they doing here?" He pointed to A. Byron. "I only gave you the code to this place." "I invited 8B," Himaru said defiantly, then grabbed the other Vocaloid's hand for reassurance and said, "I just came here to tell you before you heard or figured it out on your own." "Heard what?" "That AB and I are an item." A. Byron stepped closer to Riku and gave him a feral smile. "And that I'm an avatar, like you. This was all Himaru's idea. Thanks for selling psychomechanics and your remaining stock in Taisaku to me. Enjoy your fake island." Both abruptly teleported out in an explosion of hearts and stars. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. To get other great APN podcasts, head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com, where you'll find The Breakfast Dish. Each episode, Griffin Cork and his mom, Karen Johnson Diamond, get to know Canadian artists. This podcast is gluten-free. This episode of Makeshift Stories is brought to you by Alberta Blue Cross. Alberta Blue Cross understands that running a small business is tough, and they understand that business owners in Alberta are busy. Let Alberta Blue Cross give you peace of mind with a group benefit plan. They offer health, dental, life, and disability coverage for your employees. Alberta Blue Cross group benefit plans are easy to manage anywhere, anytime, and on any device, making it easy for you and your employees to access. To learn more and explore your options, head to ab.bluecross.ca. This episode of Makeshift Stories is also brought to you by Taproot Spotlight, a service that helps businesses and organizations pay attention to the people they serve. Taproot tells you the news about the people and companies that are important to you. Use that information internally to keep everyone on the same page, or share it with the world in your newsletter, on your website, and on your social media channels. Paying attention pays dividends. Find out more at taprootpublishing.ca/spotlight. That's taprootpublishing.ca/spotlight. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell II. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Makeshift Studios. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by getting your friends to subscribe or follow wherever they listen to audio. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.